I still remember the exact moment everything inside me went cold. It wasn't the tube itself that hurt me. It was where I found it. Hidden beneath the passenger seat of my husband's car, half rolled, carelessly pushed out of sight like it meant nothing. Like it was just another random object. But it wasn't random. I sat there in the driver's seat, the car door still open, my hand gripping that small, silent piece of evidence. The late afternoon sun was slipping through the windshield, cutting across my face, but I felt none of its warmth. My heart was steady. Too steady. The kind of calm that only comes before something breaks. My husband, Daniel, was not a careless man. He was precise, organized, predictable. The kind of man who lined up his shoes perfectly by the door and never forgot where he put his keys. So finding something like that hidden, forgotten, it didn't fit. Which meant one thing. It wasn't meant to be found. I didn't cry. I didn't panic. I didn't even confront him. Not yet. Instead, I placed the tube back exactly where I found it, making sure the angle was the same, the dust around it undisturbed. Then I closed the car door gently and walked back inside the house like nothing had happened. That night, Daniel came home at exactly 7:12 p.m., just like always. He kissed my cheek. I smiled. He asked how my day was. I told him it was fine. We ate dinner together in silence, the soft clinking of cutlery filling the gaps where conversation used to live. I watched him carefully, studying every movement, every glance, every breath. He looked normal. Too normal. And that made it worse. "Are you okay?" he asked suddenly, his eyes narrowing slightly. I nodded. Of course. Why wouldn't I be? He shrugged and went back to eating. That was the moment I knew. He wasn't going to tell me. Not tonight. Not tomorrow. Maybe not ever. And something inside me shifted. I didn't sleep that night. I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying every late night, every work emergency. Every time he came home just a little too tired, a little too distant. The signs were always there. I just never wanted to see them. By morning, I wasn't heartbroken anymore. I was focused. The next day, I waited until Daniel left for work. I watched his car disappear down the street, then counted to 30 before moving. Not because I had to, but because I needed to feel in control. I grabbed my keys and headed straight for the garage. The air inside the car felt different this time. Heavier. Like it knew what I was about to do. I reached under the seat and pulled the tube out again. For a long moment, I just stared at it. My reflection stared back at me from the rearview mirror. Calm. Still. Unrecognizable. I wasn't acting out of impulse. This wasn't rage. This was something colder. Something quieter. I got out of the car and walked back into the house, heading straight for the storage cabinet in the laundry room. My fingers brushed past cleaning supplies, old tools, forgotten boxes, until they stopped. Industrial glue. Strong. Fast-setting. Unforgiving. I picked it up slowly, reading the label as if I needed confirmation of what I already knew. A small, almost invisible smile touched my lips. Then I went back to the car. Every movement was deliberate. Measured. I unscrewed the cap of the original tube and emptied it carefully into the sink in the garage, rinsing away every trace. Then I filled it with the glue, making sure the texture looked similar, the weight felt right. No mistakes. No evidence. When I was done, I sealed it tightly and placed it back under the seat, exactly where it had been. Then I sat there for a moment, listening, waiting. The silence pressed in around me, but I didn't feel afraid. I felt ready. That evening, everything unfolded like a script I had already memorized. Daniel came home. Same time. Same routine. But this time I noticed something new. A slight tension in his shoulders. A quick glance at his phone. A subtle impatience in his movements. He was planning something. And I was already one step ahead. Working late tonight? I asked casually as I cleared the table. He hesitated for just a fraction of a second. Yeah, he said. Big deadline. I nodded, hiding the flicker of satisfaction in my eyes. Don't wait up, he added. I won't, I replied softly. But I would. Hours passed. The house was quiet, the clock ticking louder with every second. I sat on the couch, the lights dimmed, my mind sharp and alert. At 11:47 p.m. I heard it. The front door opening. Footsteps. Fast. Uneven. Not the calm, controlled steps I was used to. Something was wrong. I stood up slowly, my heart steady again, just like before. Daniel. I called out. No answer. Then a sound I had never heard from him before. A strangled gasp. Followed by a crash. I moved toward the hallway, each step careful, deliberate. The air felt thick, charged with something electric. And then I saw him. On the floor. Pale. Panicked. His breathing was shallow, his eyes wide with a kind of fear I had never seen before. What happened? I asked, my voice calm, almost too calm. He tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come out. His hands trembled. His body tense like he was fighting something invisible. I knelt beside him, tilting my head slightly, studying his face. For a brief moment, our eyes locked. And in that moment, I knew. The neighbors heard the noise before I even reached for my phone. Doors opening. Voices shouting. Footsteps rushing closer. And as the sound of sirens began to rise in the distance, growing louder with every passing second, I finally picked up the phone. But I didn't feel panic. I didn't feel regret. I just watched him. And waited. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. The sound of sirens cut through the night, growing louder with every second, until flashing red and blue lights filled the windows. The neighbors' voices blurred into the background as footsteps rushed up the driveway. A loud knock hit the door, followed by it swinging open. Emergency, a voice shouted. 2 paramedics and a police officer stepped inside, their movements fast and practiced. They went straight to Daniel, kneeling beside him, asking questions he couldn't answer. What happened to him? One of them asked, glancing up at me. I let a pause hang in the air, just long enough. I don't know, I said quietly. He came home like this. They exchanged a quick look, but didn't question it further. Their focus stayed on him. Daniel tried to speak again, his eyes darting toward me for a split second. There was something in that look. Fear, confusion, and something else. Recognition. But he couldn't form the words. His body betrayed him. Within moments, they had him on a stretcher, securing straps, checking his pulse, his breathing, his reactions. One of them called something out, medical terms urgent but controlled. I stepped back, giving them space, my face carefully arranged into concern. Ma'am, we're taking him to the hospital, the paramedic said. You can follow us if you want. I nodded immediately. Of course. But inside I was already calculating. As they carried him out, the neighbors stood in clusters on their lawns, whispering, watching. Their eyes flicked between me and the ambulance like they were trying to piece together a story. I gave them nothing. Just a worried wife, standing in her doorway. Nothing more. The ambulance doors slammed shut. The siren roared again. And just like that, he was gone. I waited exactly 1 minute before grabbing my keys. Not too fast. Not too slow. Normal. The drive to the hospital felt longer than usual, even though I knew every turn, every signal. My hands rested lightly on the steering wheel, my posture relaxed. Anyone watching would think I was in shock. But my mind was sharp, focused, replaying every detail. When I arrived, the emergency entrance was crowded with people moving in every direction. Nurses, patients, families, chaos wrapped in fluorescent light. I stepped inside, my eyes scanning quickly until I found the front desk. My husband was just brought in, I said, my voice slightly unsteady now. Daniel Carter. The nurse typed something into her computer, her expression professional. Yes, he's in critical care. They're assessing him now. Please have a seat. Critical. The word echoed for a moment. I nodded and turned toward the waiting area. The chairs were cold, uncomfortable. I sat down anyway, folding my hands in my lap, staring straight ahead. Time passed. Or maybe it didn't. It was hard to tell. Every now and then, I caught fragments of conversations around me. Someone crying. Someone arguing. A doctor giving quiet, serious updates. Life and death moving side by side. And I sat right in the middle of it. Waiting. After what felt like hours, a doctor finally approached me. Mrs. Carter, he asked. I stood up immediately. Yes. How is he? The doctor's expression was careful, measured. He's stable for now, he said. But he experienced a severe reaction. We're still trying to determine exactly what caused it. I tilted my head slightly, letting confusion show. A reaction? To what? That's what we're investigating, he replied. We ran some initial tests, and there are signs of exposure to a strong chemical substance. For a brief second, my heart gave a single, slow beat. But my face didn't change. A chemical? I repeated softly. Yes, he said. Something that shouldn't be in contact with the human body. Silence stretched between us. I let my eyes drop, as if processing the information, as if trying to make sense of something impossible. Can I see him? I asked. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Briefly. He led me down a long hallway, the sterile smell of antiseptic filling the air. Machines beeped steadily behind closed doors. Each sound a reminder of how fragile everything really was. We stopped outside a room. The doctor pushed the door open slightly. He's conscious but weak, he said. Don't stress him. I nodded and stepped inside. Daniel lay on the bed, pale, connected to monitors, and four running into his arm. His eyes were open, staring at the ceiling. For a moment he didn't notice me. Then his gaze shifted, and locked onto mine. There it was again. That same look. Fear. But stronger now. Clearer. He knew. I walked closer, my steps slow, controlled, until I stood beside the bed. Daniel, I said softly, reaching for his hand. He flinched. It was small, barely noticeable. But I saw it. I felt it. My fingers wrapped around his anyway, holding gently, like a concerned wife should. What happened to you? I whispered. His lips parted, trying to form words. Nothing came out. Only a strained breath. His eyes searched my face, desperate, as if he was looking for confirmation. Or maybe denial. I leaned in slightly, close enough that no one else could hear. And for the first time, I let the truth slip just enough. You should have been more careful, I murmured. His entire body stiffened. The monitors reacted instantly, the steady rhythm shifting into something faster, sharper. I pulled back just as quickly, my expression returning to concern. Doctor! I called out. Something's wrong. Within seconds, the room filled again. Nurses. The doctor. Urgent voices. They moved around him, adjusting equipment, checking readings, pushing me gently aside. I stepped back, watching it all unfold. Silent. Invisible. As if I wasn't part of it. As if I had nothing to do with it. But as I stood there, one thought settled deep in my mind. This wasn't over. Not even close. Because now, he knew. And sooner or later, he would try to tell them. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. The thought settled heavily in my mind as I stood there, watching the doctor stabilize him again. The machine slowly returned to a steady rhythm, but the tension in the room didn't fade. It shifted. From urgency to suspicion. His heart rate spiked suddenly. One nurse said under her breath. Could be stress response, the doctor replied, though his tone wasn't fully convinced. Stress. That word lingered in the air. I stayed quiet, my arms folded lightly, my expression carefully controlled. Just a worried wife, standing in the corner hoping for answers. But inside I was already thinking ahead. Daniel's eyes opened again, weaker this time, but still aware. And the moment he saw me, I noticed it. He tried to move, to react, to do something. But his body failed him again. Sir, you need to stay calm, the doctor said firmly. You're not in a condition to move or speak too much. Speak. That was the danger. Because if he managed even a few words, if he pointed, if he signaled, if he gave them anything, everything could change. I stepped forward slowly. Can I stay with him? I asked, my voice soft, almost fragile now. The doctor hesitated, then nodded. Only for a few minutes. That was enough. The nurses stepped back slightly, still monitoring, but giving space. I moved closer to the bed again. Daniel's breathing was uneven, his chest rising and falling with effort. His eyes were locked onto mine, filled with something raw and desperate. He was trying to understand, trying to confirm, trying to survive. I leaned down just slightly, keeping my face within his line of sight. Don't, I whispered, so quietly it barely existed. His pupils shifted. Confusion. Then realization. His fingers twitched weakly, as if he wanted to grab me, to stop me, to expose me. But he couldn't. Not yet. Sir, relax, a nurse repeated, noticing the movement. I straightened up immediately, stepping back again, letting them take over. Timing mattered. Control mattered. And right now I still had both. Mrs. Carter, the doctor said, turning to me. We need to run more tests. It would be best if you wait outside. I nodded, giving one last look at Daniel before leaving the room. But that look, it said everything. I stepped back into the hallway, the door closing softly behind me. And for the first time that night, I felt a small crack in my control. Not fear, not regret, but awareness. Because this wasn't just about what had happened anymore. This was about what would happen next. And Daniel was no longer completely powerless. Hours passed again. Slower this time. Heavier. The hospital felt colder now, the bright lights harsher, the silence louder between distant sounds. I sat in the waiting area, my posture still, my mind anything but. I needed information. So I stood up and walked back to the front desk. Any updates? I asked. The nurse checked her system. They're running toxicology reports, she said. The doctors are trying to identify the exact substance. Toxicology. That meant time. That meant analysis. That meant risk. Will he be okay? I asked, lowering my voice slightly. It's too early to say, she replied. But he's stable for now. Stable. That word again. It was both a relief and a problem. Because as long as he was stable, he could recover. And if he recovered, he could speak. I returned to my seat, my thoughts sharpening. I needed to know what he remembered, how much he understood, and more importantly, what he might say. The next time the doctor came out, I didn't wait for him to approach. I went straight to him. Doctor, please, I said, letting urgency slip into my voice. I need to understand what's going on. He looked at me for a moment, studying my face. Then he sighed quietly. The substance we found is unusual, he admitted. It's a highly adhesive chemical compound. Very strong. Not something typically found in household products. My heart didn't skip. It didn't race. It stayed steady. And how could he have been exposed to something like that? I asked. That's what we're trying to figure out, he said. Do you know if he works with any industrial materials? Chemicals? Anything like that? I shook my head immediately. No, nothing like that. He nodded slowly, but I could tell. He wasn't fully convinced. Sometimes these things happen through accidental contact, he continued. We'll know more once the full report comes in. Accidental. That word almost made me smile. But I held it back. Can I see him again? I asked. The doctor hesitated longer this time. He's resting now, he said. It's best to give him time. Time. That was the one thing I didn't want him to have. Because time meant strength. And strength meant voice. I nodded anyway and stepped back. I had to be careful now. Every move mattered more than before. Because the situation was changing. Evolving. Slipping out of that perfect control I had built. As I turned away, I caught something out of the corner of my eye. A police officer. Standing near the end of the hallway. Watching. Not directly at me. But close enough. Observing. Waiting. And in that moment, a new realization settled in. This wasn't just a medical situation anymore. It was becoming something else. Something bigger. Because if the doctors couldn't explain what happened, someone else would try to. And when they did, they would start asking questions. Questions that led back to one place. Me. Was I right or wrong? Comment below. The word echoed in my mind as I stood there, feeling the weight of that realization settle deep into my chest. Not heavy enough to slow me down, but sharp enough to keep me alert. I didn't look at the officer again. Not directly. Instead, I walked calmly back to my seat, every step measured, every movement controlled. My face stayed neutral, my breathing steady. To anyone watching, I was just a woman waiting for news about her husband. Nothing more. Nothing suspicious. But I could feel it now. The shift. The invisible line that had been crossed. This was no longer just between me and Daniel. Other people were stepping in. And they would not stop at surface-level answers. I sat down, folding my hands in my lap again, staring at the floor for a moment before slowly lifting my gaze. The officer was still there, talking to a nurse now. Quietly, calmly. But his eyes, they moved. Scanning. Observing. Noticing things most people would ignore. I looked away before he could catch me watching him. Good. Let him wonder. Minutes passed. Or maybe longer. Time felt distorted now, stretched thin between tension and silence. Then I heard it. Mom. I looked up. The officer was standing in front of me now. Close. Too close. Mrs. Carter? He asked. I nodded slowly, letting a hint of confusion show. Yes. I'm Officer Reynolds, he said, his voice calm but firm. I just need to ask you a few questions about what happened tonight. Of course. It was starting. I swallowed lightly and nodded again. Okay. He gestured toward a quieter corner of the waiting area. Do you mind? No, I said, standing up. We walked a few steps away, just enough to create a sense of privacy without leaving the public space. Smart. That meant he didn't want to alarm me. Not yet. Can you tell me what happened when your husband came home? He asked. Simple question. But not a simple answer. I took a small breath, letting my shoulders drop slightly. He came home late, I began. Later than usual. I was in the living room when I heard something, like a crash. I paused, just long enough to make it feel real. I went to check, and he was already on the floor. He couldn't speak. He looked terrified. All true, just not complete. The officer nodded, watching my face closely. Did he say anything at all? He asked. I shook my head. No. He tried, but nothing came out. Another pause. Has he been acting differently lately? He continued. There it was. The door opening. I hesitated, just enough to make it believable. I don't know, I said softly. Maybe a little distant. Working late more often. The officer's eyes sharpened slightly. Do you know where he was tonight? I looked down for a moment, then back up. He said he had a deadline. Work. The officer nodded slowly, as if filing everything away. And what about his job? Does he deal with any chemicals or industrial materials? No, I said immediately. He works in an office. That part was true, which made it easier to say. The officer crossed his arms lightly, thinking. Doctors mentioned some kind of chemical exposure, he said. Something strong. I let confusion return to my face. I don't understand how that's possible. He watched me for a long second. Long enough to test me. Long enough to see if I would break. But I didn't. Not even a flicker. Finally, he nodded. All right, he said. If you remember anything else, anything at all, let us know. I will, I replied. He gave a small, polite nod and stepped back. But he didn't leave. Not completely. He stayed nearby, watching. That was fine. Let him watch. Because the truth wasn't something he could see. Not yet. I returned to my seat again, but this time, I didn't sit for long. I needed air. I needed space to think. I'm going to step outside for a moment, I told the nurse at the desk. She nodded without question. The night air hit my face the moment I stepped out of the hospital doors. Cool. Sharp. Real. I inhaled deeply, letting it ground me. Then exhaled slowly. Everything was moving faster now. The doctors. The tests. The police. And Daniel. He was still alive. Still a risk. I walked a few steps away from the entrance, my eyes scanning the empty parking lot. The flashing lights were gone now, replaced by a quiet stillness. But inside my head, nothing was quiet. I needed to think ahead. If Daniel spoke, what would he say? Would he tell them about the tube? Would he accuse me directly? Or would he hesitate, unsure, confused? That uncertainty was my advantage. At least for now. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone, staring at the dark screen for a moment before unlocking it. There was one thing I hadn't checked yet. His messages. if there was someone else, if there was proof. I needed to see it. Not for emotion, not for closure, but for control. I scrolled through his recent activity, my eyes moving quickly, efficiently. And then, I found it. A name. Not saved. Just a number. But the messages. They said everything. Short. Careful. Hidden in plain sight. But unmistakable. My grip on the phone tightened slightly. So it was real. Not just suspicion. Not just a possibility. A fact. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly locked the phone again. No anger. No tears. Just clarity. Because now, this wasn't just about what I had done. It was about what he had been doing. And that changed everything. I lifted my head, looking back at the hospital entrance. Bright lights. Open doors. People moving in and out. A place where truth was supposed to come out. But truth wasn't always simple. And as I stood there, one thought settled firmly into place. If Daniel survived this, he wouldn't just be a victim. He would be a problem. And problems needed to be handled. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. The thought settled into me like something permanent, something that didn't need to be questioned anymore. I stood outside the hospital a moment longer, letting the cool air steady my breathing, then turned and walked back inside. Everything looked the same. Bright lights, quiet urgency, people moving with purpose. But now I saw it differently. Now every hallway felt like a path closing in. Every face felt like a potential witness. And every second that passed gave Daniel more time. Time to recover. Time to think. Time to speak. I walked back to the waiting area, slower this time, more aware. The officer was still there, but he didn't approach me again. That was fine. He had asked his questions. For now. I sat down, crossing my legs, resting my hands lightly on my lap. And then I waited. But this time, I wasn't just waiting for updates. I was planning. If Daniel regained enough strength to talk, the first thing he would do is try to tell someone. Maybe a doctor. Maybe a nurse. Maybe even that officer. But would they believe him? That depended on how he told it. And how I responded. Because truth, without proof, is just a story. And stories can be twisted, shaped, broken, rewritten. A nurse walked past me, then slowed down. Mrs. Carter? I looked up. Yes. He's asking for you. My eyes narrowed just slightly. Asking for me. So he was awake. Strong enough to request. That meant one thing. The clock had started. I'll come, I said, standing immediately. The walk to his room felt shorter this time. Quicker. Like everything was accelerating. The nurse opened the door and stepped aside. He can't talk much, she said. Just keep it brief. I nodded and stepped inside. Daniel looked worse. Paler than before. Weaker. But his eyes. They were sharper. Focused. Waiting. The moment he saw me, something shifted in his expression. Not just fear anymore. Something closer to urgency. Desperation. I closed the door behind me. Not fully. Just enough. Then I walked to his bedside. You wanted to see me? I asked quietly. His lips moved. This time a sound came out. Broken. Weak. But there. Why you? I leaned closer. As if trying to hear him better. What is it? I whispered. His hand twitched, lifting slightly off the bed. Fingers trembling as they tried to point. At me. Of course. I didn't react. Not outwardly. You need to rest, I said softly. Don't try to force it. His breathing quickened, frustration building in his eyes. He tried again. Why you did. The words barely formed. But they were enough. I placed my hand gently over his, pressing it down against the bed. Not forcefully. Just enough. You shouldn't have hidden things from me, I murmured, low enough that only he could hear. His entire body tensed. The monitor beside him reacted again. The steady rhythm starting to spike. You think they'll understand? I continued softly. If you tell them, how exactly will you explain it? His eyes widened. Because he knew. There was no clean explanation. No simple version of events that didn't expose him to. The tube. The secrecy. The lies. I straightened up just as the nurse stepped back into the room. "Everything okay?" she asked, glancing at the monitor. "Yes," I said calmly. "He's just trying to talk." The nurse moved closer, checking his vitals. "Sir, you need to stay calm," she said. "You're not ready to speak yet." Daniel's eyes stayed locked on mine, burning now. Not just with fear, but with anger. Good. Anger made people reckless. And reckless people made mistakes. I stepped back slowly. "I'll let you rest," I said. He tried to move again to stop me, but the nurse gently held him in place. "Not now," she told him firmly. I turned and walked out of the room without looking back. But I could feel it. That shift again. The balance changing. He wasn't just a victim anymore. He was aware. And awareness was dangerous. Back in the hallway, I paused for a moment, my mind moving faster than ever. He had tried to accuse me. He would try again. And next time, he might succeed. Unless I got there first. I walked back toward the waiting area, but I didn't sit down this time. Instead, I stopped at the front desk. "Excuse me," I said. "Is there any update on the toxicology report?" The nurse looked at her screen. "Not yet," she said. "It takes time." Time. That word again. Always working against me. "Can I speak to the doctor?" I asked. "He's busy at the moment," she replied. Of course he was. Everyone was busy. Except me. I stepped away, my thoughts tightening into something sharper. I needed to shift the narrative. Before Daniel found a way to do it himself. I turned slightly, my eyes scanning the hallway again. And then I saw him. Officer Reynolds. Still there. Still watching. Still waiting. Perfect that I took a slow breath and walked toward him. "Officer," I said, my voice steady but laced with something softer now. "Can I talk to you for a moment?" He looked at me, a hint of curiosity in his expression. "Of course." We stepped aside again. "What is it?" he asked. I hesitated. "Just enough. I didn't mention this before," I said quietly. "But I found something earlier today. In my husband's car." His attention sharpened immediately. "What kind of something?" I looked down then back up, as if unsure whether to continue. "A tube," I said. I didn't think much of it at first, but now with what the doctors are saying. I let the sentence trail off. The officer leaned slightly closer. "Do you still have it?" he asked. I shook my head slowly. "No. I left it where I found it." That was the truth. Just not the whole truth. "What kind of tube?" he pressed. I swallowed lightly. "I'm not entirely sure," I said. But it didn't seem like something normal. He studied my face again, looking for cracks, looking for lies. But all he saw was a concerned wife trying to make sense of something terrible. "I think we should take a look at that," he said. I nodded. "Yes. I think you should." And as I stood there, watching him process everything, I realized something important. I didn't need to run from the truth. I just needed to guide it. And right now, he was starting to follow exactly where I wanted him to go. Was I right or wrong? Comment below. The realization settled in quietly as I stood in front of Officer Reynolds, watching the shift in his eyes. Suspicion hadn't disappeared, it had simply changed direction. That was all I needed. "Where is the car now?" he asked. "In the garage," I replied calmly. "At home?" He nodded once, already thinking ahead. "I'm going to need you to come with me," he said. "We should take a look at it as soon as possible." Of course. This was the next step. "I understand," I said softly. He gestured toward the exit. "I'll arrange for someone to stay here in case there are updates. Let's go." I gave one last glance down the hallway, the direction of Daniel's room, then turned away without hesitation. Because right now, the hospital wasn't where the real problem was. The car was. The drive back felt different this time. Quieter. More focused. Officer Reynolds drove. I sat in the passenger seat, my hands resting lightly in my lap, my gaze fixed out the window. Neither of us spoke for the first few minutes. But the silence wasn't empty. It was filled with calculation. He was thinking, connecting details, replaying my words. And I was doing the same. Only difference. I already knew the answers. We'll need to process the vehicle, he said finally. If there's anything unusual, we'll find it. I nodded. I just want to understand what happened to my husband, I replied. That part wasn't a lie. The car pulled into our driveway, headlights cutting across the front of the house. Everything looked exactly as we had left it. Still, normal. Like nothing had happened. But that illusion wouldn't last much longer. We stepped out of the car. The night was quiet again, the kind of silence that made every small sound feel louder. I walked toward the garage and opened the door. The car sat there, exactly where I had left it. Unchanged. Waiting. Officer Reynolds stepped inside, pulling out a flashlight, though the overhead light was already on. Show me where you found it, he said. I moved toward the passenger side and opened the door slowly. There, I said, pointing under the seat. He crouched down, shining the light beneath. And then, he saw it. The tube. Exactly where it should be. He reached in carefully, pulling it out, examining it without touching the opening. His expression didn't change much. But I noticed the slight tightening in his jaw. This is what you found, he asked. Yes. He turned it slightly, reading the label, studying the texture, the weight. Then he stood up. I'm going to call this in, he said. We'll need it tested. Of course. That was expected. He stepped outside to make the call, leaving me alone in the garage. For the first time since this began, I was alone with the evidence. I looked at the car, at the seat, at the exact place where everything had started. And for a brief moment, I allowed myself to feel it. Not guilt, not fear, but the weight of what had been set in motion. Because this wasn't just a reaction anymore. It was a chain. And every step forward made it harder to stop. Footsteps approached again. I turned as Officer Reynolds came back inside. They're sending a team, he said. We'll process everything here. I nodded, stepping back to give him space. Within minutes, more lights appeared outside. Another vehicle. Then another. People stepped out, carrying equipment, moving with quiet efficiency. The garage filled with controlled activity. Gloves. Bags. Cameras. Every inch of the car was documented. Every surface examined. And I stood there, watching it all. Ma'am, we're going to need you to step outside, one of them said. I nodded and walked out without protest. The cool night air greeted me again, but this time it felt different. Heavier. Because now, this was official. There was no going back. I stood near the edge of the driveway, my eyes occasionally drifting toward the garage, where shadows moved behind bright lights. Officer Reynolds stepped out a few minutes later, joining me. Did your husband ever mention this? He asked. No, I said. Never. Did you notice anything unusual recently? Anyone new in his life? I let a small hesitation appear. I'm not sure, I said. He's been distant. Working late. I thought it was just stress. He nodded slowly. Sometimes there's more to it, he said. Yes, there was. But not the way he thought. A technician walked out of the garage, holding a sealed evidence bag. Inside it, the tube. Taken. Removed. No longer in my control. They'll run a full analysis, the officer said. We'll know exactly what's in it. Exactly. That word echoed louder than the rest. Because exactly was dangerous. But only if the full story came with it. And right now, it didn't. Hours passed again. Statements were taken. Photos were captured. Questions were asked in different ways, from different angles. But my answers didn't change. Not even slightly. Consistency was key. And I never slipped. Finally, as the activity slowed, Officer Reynolds turned to me. You can head back to the hospital, he said. We'll contact you once we have results. I nodded. Thank you. I got into my car again, the engine humming softly as I pulled away from the house. The drive back felt longer this time. Not because of distance, but because of what was waiting. Daniel. Still alive. Still thinking. Still trying to speak. And now, there was something new. Evidence. Moving through a system I couldn't control. I tightened my grip on the steering wheel slightly. The plan had worked. So far. But it wasn't over. Not even close. Because now, it wasn't just about what I had done. It was about what they would find. And more importantly, what they would believe. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. That thought stayed with me the entire drive back to the hospital, echoing quietly but persistently in the back of my mind. Because in the end, it was never just about truth. It was about perception. And perception could be shaped. I pulled into the hospital parking lot, the bright lights cutting through the darkness once again. Everything looked the same as before, but nothing felt the same. Now there were too many moving pieces, too many variables, too many risks. I stepped out of the car and walked inside, my pace steady, my face composed. The moment I entered, the familiar hum of activity surrounded me again. But this time, I noticed something different. 2 officers instead of 1, standing near the hallway, talking quietly, waiting. News was spreading. Good. Or bad. It depended on how it was handled. I walked toward the front desk. Any updates? I asked. The nurse looked up at me, then glanced briefly toward the hallway before answering. He's awake, she said. Doctors are monitoring him closely. Awake. That word hit differently now. Not relief. Not comfort. Pressure. Can I see him? I asked. She hesitated. Just for a short time, she said finally. But there's an officer inside as well. Of course there was. I nodded. That's fine. She pointed down the hallway. I walked forward, each step quiet but deliberate. The closer I got, the more I could feel it. The tension. Thicker than before. Heavier. I reached the door and paused for just a second before pushing it open. Daniel was sitting slightly upright now, supported by the bed. He looked weaker than ever. But his eyes, they were alive. Alert. And he wasn't alone. Officer Reynolds stood beside the bed. Of course it had to be him. Their eyes shifted toward me the moment I entered. Mrs. Carter, the officer said. Perfect timing. I gave a small, polite nod. How is he? I asked, stepping closer. Daniel's gaze locked onto mine instantly. And this time, there was no confusion. No hesitation. Only certainty. He's been trying to communicate, the officer said. It's difficult, but we're getting pieces. Pieces. That was dangerous. I moved closer to the bed, careful, controlled. Daniel, I said softly. His lips parted again, his voice still weak, broken but stronger than before. He forced out. The room went still. She, the officer repeated, leaning slightly closer. Daniel's eyes didn't leave mine. See. His hand lifted slowly, trembling, but this time, stronger, more controlled. And then, he pointed. At me. The silence that followed was heavy, sharp, unavoidable. I didn't react immediately, didn't panic, didn't step back. Instead, I let confusion fill my expression, just enough. Daniel, what are you trying to say? I asked gently. His breathing quickened, frustration building as he tried again. She did. The officer turned his head slightly toward me, his expression changing, not accusing yet, but no longer neutral. Interesting. I took a small step closer to the bed, placing my hand lightly over Daniel's again. Hey, I said softly. It's okay. You don't need to force it. He jerked slightly at my touch. That reaction didn't go unnoticed. Sir, try to stay calm, the officer said, watching both of us now. Perfect. The focus had shifted. Not just on his words, but on his behavior. I think he's confused, I said quietly, looking at the officer. He's been under so much stress lately. Daniel's eyes widened at that. Anger. Raw. Unfiltered. Good. Let him feel it. Anger would make him sloppy. He's not confused, the officer said carefully. No, I replied, just as carefully. But he's not clear either. I turned back to Daniel, lowering my voice slightly. You've been working too hard, I murmured. Not sleeping, barely eating. His breathing became sharper, the monitor reacting again. The officer noticed. So he has been under stress? He asked. I nodded slowly. Yes. A lot. That was true. Just not in the way they thought. Daniel tried again, pushing harder this time. Shikar. There it was. A new word. A new direction. The officer caught it immediately. Car, he repeated. What about the car? Daniel's eyes flicked toward me again. Then back to the officer. Der. The officer straightened slightly. Under, he said. Under the car? Under the seat. Daniel blinked hard. A weak attempt at a nod. That was enough. The officer's expression shifted again. Pieces were connecting. But not completely. Not yet. I already told you, I said softly, stepping in at the right moment. I found something under the seat earlier today. The officer looked at me. You mentioned that, yes. Daniel's breathing grew faster. Desperate now. Trying to push further. But his strength wasn't enough. Not yet. You see, I said gently. He's trying to explain, but he can't get it out properly. The officer didn't respond immediately. He was thinking. Replaying everything. Comparing both sides. Good. That meant uncertainty. And uncertainty was my advantage. Daniel's hand dropped back onto the bed, his strength fading again. His eyes stayed open, locked on mine, but the intensity was slipping. The moment was passing. And he knew it. Get some rest, the officer said to him. We'll talk again later. Daniel tried to resist, but his body gave in. His eyes slowly closed. Not fully unconscious, but close enough. The room grew quieter. The tension didn't disappear. It just changed shape. The officer turned to me. Interesting timing, he said. I met his gaze calmly. I just want him to be okay, I replied. That part sounded real. Because in a way, it was. Just not for the reasons he assumed. The officer studied my face for a long moment. Longer than before. Because now, there was something there. Not proof. Not certainty. But doubt. And doubt was where everything could fall apart. Or come together. He finally nodded once. We'll talk again, he said. I understand, I replied. I gave one last look at Daniel, then turned and walked out of the room. But this time, I didn't feel in control. Not completely. Because now, he had started to speak. And sooner or later, he wouldn't stop. Enjoying the story? Subscribe for more. That truth followed me out into the hallway like a shadow I couldn't shake. Every step I took felt heavier now, not because I was losing control, but because the game had changed. Daniel had crossed a line. He wasn't just reacting anymore. He was trying to expose me. And the more he recovered, the more dangerous he would become. That I slowed my pace, stopping near the end of the hallway, my eyes drifting toward the window. The city lights outside flickered faintly, distant and indifferent. Everything out there kept moving. Normal. Unaware. While inside this building, everything was tightening. I needed to think. Not react. Think. Because reacting now would be a mistake. And mistakes were the only thing I couldn't afford. Footsteps approached behind me. I didn't turn right away. I already knew who it was. Mrs. Carter. Officer Reynolds. His voice was calm. Too calm. I turned slowly, meeting his gaze. Yes. He stepped closer, stopping just far enough to keep things professional. Your husband is trying to say something very specific, he said. I know, I replied quietly. And he seems to believe you're involved. There it was. Not an accusation, but close enough to feel like one. I let a small breath escape, lowering my eyes for just a second before looking back up. He's not thinking clearly, I said. You saw him. I did, he replied. But I also saw how he reacted to you. Of course he did. He was paying attention now. Good. That meant I had to be better. Anyone would react like that, I said softly. He's scared. He doesn't understand what's happening to him. The officer watched me carefully. Maybe, he said. Or maybe he does. Silence stretched between us. This wasn't like before. This wasn't casual questioning. This was testing. Pressure. And I could feel it. But I didn't step back. I didn't break. Did you find anything in the car? I asked, shifting the focus just enough. His eyes narrowed slightly. We're still waiting on the analysis. Then maybe that will explain everything, I said. He didn't respond immediately. Because he knew. That answer could go in more than one direction. I'll need you to stay available, he said finally. Don't leave town. I gave a small nod. I'm not going anywhere. That was true. For now. He held my gaze for another second, then turned and walked away. But this time, I felt it clearly. The doubt had grown, not just around Daniel's words, but around me. I stood there for a moment longer, then slowly walked back toward the waiting area. But I didn't sit. Instead, I kept moving. Out of the hallway, past the front desk, through the doors, back outside. The night air felt colder now, sharper, like it was cutting through everything I had built. I walked a few steps away from the entrance, my arms folding lightly as I stared into the darkness. He wouldn't stop. And next time, he might be stronger, clearer, more convincing. Which meant one thing. I couldn't wait for that moment. I had to act before it happened. But how? I couldn't touch him here. Not with doctors, nurses, and police surrounding him. I couldn't interfere directly. Too risky. Too obvious. So the solution had to be something else. Something indirect. Something that looked natural. Unavoidable. My mind moved quickly, running through possibilities, discarding them just as fast. No mistakes. No loose ends. Then, a thought. Small. Simple. But effective. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my phone again, staring at the screen for a moment before unlocking it. His messages. That number. Still there. Still unanswered. I opened the conversation again, reading through it more carefully this time. Patterns. Timing. Meetings. Locations. And then, an address. My eyes paused on it. A place I didn't recognize, but one he had visited more than once. Interesting. Very interesting. Because that meant there was someone else in this story. Someone who didn't know what had happened tonight. Someone who might still be expecting him, or wondering why he hadn't shown up. I stared at the screen for a long moment, then slowly exhaled. This could change everything. Not just for me, but for the entire situation. Because if there was another person involved, the focus could shift. The narrative could expand. And Daniel's version of events wouldn't be the only one anymore. I typed a message, then stopped. Deleted it. No. Too direct. Too risky. I needed to be careful. Precise. So I locked the phone again, slipping it back into my pocket. Not yet. Timing mattered. Everything depended on timing. I lifted my head, looking back at the hospital doors. Bright. Open. Full of people who believed they were in control. But they weren't. Not really. Because the truth wasn't fully formed yet. And until it was, it could still be shaped. I took a slow breath. Then another. And as I stood there, one final thought settled into place. Daniel wasn't the only one who could speak anymore. And the next move would decide everything. Was I right or wrong? Comment below. That thought echoed in my mind as I stepped back into the hospital. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, the familiar antiseptic smell sharp and clear. Every step I took felt deliberate, controlled. Every glance calculated. Nothing would be left to chance. The waiting area was quieter now, shadows stretching along the walls as the night deepened. I spotted Officer Reynolds still standing near the front desk, talking quietly into his radio. Good. Patience. Observation. Let him think he had control. Let him believe he was piecing it together. I walked past him, my heels clicking softly against the floor, heading toward the hallway. The nurses glanced at me, familiar with my presence by now. Some nodded. Some avoided my eyes. All of it worked in my favor. Routine. Comfort. The illusion of normalcy. I approached Daniel's room slowly, each step deliberate. My heartbeat steady. Inside, I could see him sitting upright, supported by pillows. He looked exhausted, drained, but his eyes, burned with clarity now. Awareness. A dangerous awareness that had grown stronger with every passing hour. Mrs. Carter, Officer Reynolds said softly, stepping slightly ahead to block the doorway. He's still weak. You should be cautious. I nodded, keeping my expression neutral. Of course. I'm just checking on him. He hesitated but stepped aside, letting me enter. The room was quiet except for the steady beeping of the monitors. Daniel turned his gaze toward me the moment I closed the door behind me. You shouldn't have done that, he whispered, his voice strained but sharp. What you did. I tilted my head slightly, feigning concern. What do you mean, Daniel? I just found you like this. I was worried. His eyes narrowed, searching mine. He was struggling to form words, desperate to get them out, but the strength wasn't there yet. The tube you... I stepped closer slowly, gently placing a hand over his trembling fingers. I'm here. Let's not strain yourself. Just breathe. He jerked slightly at my touch, frustration evident in his expression. The monitor spiked again with his uneven breathing. Perfect. Let him feel the strain. Let him know he's not fully in control. Officer Reynolds watched from the corner, clearly analyzing both of us. Good. Let him draw conclusions on what he thinks he sees. Misinterpretation is an ally. Daniel, you've been under so much stress, I murmured, leaning slightly closer. Working late, sleeping poorly, worrying about deadlines. I know it's overwhelming. His pupils dilated. Anger mixed with fear. He tried again, pushing, straining, words forming. Shikar under. Yes. That's exactly what I needed him to say. Weak enough that it's fragmented, but strong enough that the meaning starts to form in someone else's mind. Right, I said gently, pressing just enough to make it seem like I was helping him. You found something under the car seat. I understand. But it's okay, no one's in trouble here. Let's wait for the doctors to sort it out. The officer leaned forward slightly, interest piqued. I held his gaze softly, reinforcing the narrative of a caring, concerned wife. Daniel's frustration grew, his hands twitching, trying to grab or point more clearly. But his strength was fading fast. The nurse approached, softly holding his shoulders to stabilize him. I told you, sir, stay calm, she said firmly. I stepped back, retreating from the immediate center of the room, letting them take over. That subtle withdrawal made the officers and medical staff believe I was neutral, uninvolved, yet caring. Excellent. Hours passed like this, Daniel growing weaker, more disoriented, while Officer Reynolds recorded and observed everything. Every glance, every gesture, every failed word, all carefully noted. Finally, as he dozed slightly, exhausted, I stepped closer again, leaning in as if whispering reassurance. Daniel, it's okay. Just rest. Everything will be fine. His eyes flickered toward me one last time, a mix of suspicion, fear, and helplessness. That moment mattered. It cemented the power balance. The officer took a step back, clearly processing everything. Doubt had grown in him again, just as I planned. I remained calm, composed. Every breath, every expression, every word was calculated. Because Daniel was recovering, yes, but the narrative wasn't in his hands anymore. Not yet. Outside, the night stretched on. Machines beeped steadily inside. Every second Daniel remained alive and conscious was a risk, but also an opportunity. I walked back toward the hallway, pausing for a moment to glance at the front desk. The nurse looked up, smiled politely. Routine. Normal. Everything working in my favor. I leaned against the wall briefly, closing my eyes for a fraction of a second. Strategy. Patience. Observation. Timing. The next moves had to be perfect. Daniel had tried to speak. He had pointed. He had almost revealed the truth. Almost. But not completely. And as long as it stayed that way, I remained in control. The real question now was how long I could keep it that way before he found a way to fight back. Before someone else interpreted the fragments differently. And before the evidence in the car, or elsewhere, forced the narrative out of my hands entirely. I opened my eyes. The next move had to be mine. Was I right or wrong? Comment below. I stepped back into the corridor, my heels clicking softly against the linoleum floor. Every sound echoed, every shadow seemed alive, stretching and twisting with the tension of the night. Daniel was inside, fragile, weakened, but his eyes, even in exhaustion, held fire. Awareness. That awareness was dangerous. But for now, it was manageable. I controlled the environment. I controlled the perception. I controlled the timing. Officer Reynolds remained stationed near the entrance to Daniel's room, glancing down at his clipboard, occasionally noting details. His attention was sharp, but I had already shifted the narrative subtly in his mind. Daniel's fragmented attempts at words, his strained gestures. He saw me as the helper, the stabilizer, not the orchestrator. That illusion was delicate, but it was still intact. I moved toward the front of the hallway, leaning lightly against the wall, my posture casual. I let my eyes drift to the hospital clock. Minutes ticked away. Every second was crucial. Every second brought Daniel closer to regaining full strength and danger, but also gave me a chance to manipulate what he thought he knew and what others interpreted. A nurse approached, her expression polite, professional. "Mrs. Carter, he's sleeping now. You can wait here if you like." I smiled faintly. "Thank you." I didn't sit. Sitting was passive. Standing gave me control. From the corner of my eye, I saw him stir. Daniel's hand twitched slightly under the blanket. Good. Small movements, small gestures. They revealed nothing concrete yet, but hinted at his frustration, his impatience, his growing urge to act. I took a slow breath. The night was far from over. My plan had worked so far, but it was incomplete. Daniel's recovery was unpredictable. His voice might break through, his memory might reconstruct, and if it did, the truth, or at least his version of it, could emerge. I couldn't allow that. My phone buzzed in my pocket. A message from earlier, the number Daniel had been in contact with. Someone else. Someone unaware of tonight's chaos. I opened it briefly, scanning the words. Location. Timing. A meeting scheduled. Unaware. Untouched by the events in the hospital. Opportunity. That was what it was. A perfect, undisturbed opportunity. If I acted carefully, if I guided events subtly, I could redirect suspicion, fragment the story further, and maintain control. Timing would be everything. Precision would be everything. I slipped the phone back into my pocket and exhaled slowly. Control. Observation. Patience. These were my allies tonight. Inside Daniel's room, his eyes fluttered open slightly. He focused immediately on me. Awareness surged through him. He tried again to form words. She-tube car. Perfect. Fragmented enough to reveal intent, but weak enough that it was incomplete. Officer Reynolds observed quietly from the corner, connecting dots. That doubt in his mind had grown. That was my advantage. I approached Daniel carefully, lowering my voice. "Shoo, it's okay. Relax. Don't push yourself." He struggled, frustration clear, but his strength was fading. The monitors beeped unevenly, signaling the strain of his attempt. I placed a hand over his fingers gently, grounding him, controlling the moment. "You're safe now," I whispered. "Everything will be okay. Just rest. Let the doctors handle it." He glared at me, anger mixed with fear. That fire was dangerous, but I let it burn internally while maintaining calm externally. Every movement, every word, every gesture reinforced the illusion that I was a caretaker, not a manipulator. Officer Reynolds approached slightly, his tone cautious. "Sir, let's take it easy. No need to stress yourself." Exactly as planned. He had taken my side. Perceived reality was aligned with my narrative. Daniel's voice was weakened, his body exhausted. The external observers, medical and legal, interpreting events according to my framing. Control remained mine. Hours passed. The night dragged on. Statements had been taken. Evidence processed. Daniel remained in his weakened state, fragmented, conscious enough to be dangerous, but constrained enough to be contained. I sat briefly in a chair outside his room, my posture relaxed. Observation. Patience. Timing. Everything depended on subtle moves, the next sequence of actions, the guidance of perception. My phone buzzed again. The same contact. A meeting now confirmed. He had not yet shown up. This was the opening. A distraction. A narrative I could direct. I planned quietly, envisioning every step, every possibility, every interpretation. Daniel might recover fully soon, but if I timed it right, if I positioned evidence, narrative, and witnesses strategically, the story would never fully form in his favor. I exhaled, letting a small, calculated smile cross my face. The hospital, the officers, the doctors, they were all pieces in a sequence I could manipulate. Daniel's recovery was a variable, yes, but it was contained for now. Everything depended on the next move. And I was ready. I stood, straightened my posture, and walked back toward the hallway. My mind sharp, my intentions clear. Every detail, every word, every glance had to be perfect. Timing was critical. Precision was everything. Because tonight would decide everything. And I would be the one to write the final chapter. The room behind me remained quiet, monitors beeping steadily. Shadows stretched across the floor. The night outside was indifferent. But inside, control, power, and strategy had shifted entirely. Daniel had tried to speak. He had tried to expose. He had nearly succeeded. But not completely. Not yet. And as I moved through the corridor, the last thought crystallized in my mind, sharper than any fear or doubt. The game was far from over. But the outcome would be mine. Wow, what a story, right? If you enjoyed this video and want to see more suspenseful stories like this, make sure to subscribe to the channel and hit that notification bell so you never miss an update. Also, I'd love to hear from you. Comment below and tell me, where did you watch this story from? Let me know your thoughts and theories about what happens next. Thank you so much for watching, and remember, the truth is always stranger than fiction. See you in the next story.